Hello, welcome to Virtual Fridays Dire Literary Series. And tonight, my feature is the wonderful Nina Shope. And let me tell you a little bit about her. And you can read along with me. This is better than karaoke. Nina Shope is the author of Hangings, 3 novellas, and also of the novel Asylum. And I think this might be an old bio, so forgive me. But more importantly, here is Asylum, which came out very recently. It's a wonderful book. I would encourage you all to pick it up. I know that folks have some time sometimes during the holidays, and it's a perfect book to read when you have some time off and to enjoy. So without anything else from me, let me turn it over to Nina Shope.
All right, well, thank you. I just wanted to make a note of the fact that the first time I did a Dire literary series reading was back in 2005 when I had my first book come out. And so it's been all that time until now. And I really appreciate, Tim, that you remembered I existed and invited me back. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from Asylum. The book centers on 2 historical figures: the famed French neurologist Jean Charcot, who became fascinated by the controversial and questionable disease of hysteria towards the end of his career in the late 1800s, and his star patient, a young hysteric named Augustine, who would have her hysterical fits and seizures on stage during his lectures, often with physical prompting of a touch or that sort of situation. So this excerpt begins in Charcot's point of view, and then it switches to the first person, which is Augustine's point of view. And it comes from early on in the book. Their power dynamic and their roles switch a lot during the course of the novel. And the only other thing I think you need to know is there's one French word in the reading. It's the word maître, which is an honorific that's used before doctors' names and professionals' names, but it literally translates to master. And it's something that Augustine frequently uses to address Charcot. So here we go. In the amphitheater, Augustine blends the convulsion of saints with the spasms of sinners, miming crucifixion, stigmata blushing her palms, her soles. She challenges the figurative nature of every metaphor, the hematomas so vivid that she truly resembles a martyr impaled at wrist and ankle, a zealot bleeding and suffering for her God. Sometimes he wishes her perpetual manifestations would cease, ease the mounting pressure to divine meaning from movements that seem increasingly meaningless. Her body on stage, a provocation that demands a response. Off stage, she is no less insistent, clamoring for his attention, growing petulant and preoccupied when she senses his discontent, her pathology increasing rather than abating. He seeks sanctuary in the amphitheater of autopsies, in the quiet precision of corpses, cadavers watching with glazed eyes as cuts are made, tumors excised, lobes of the brain exposed. The bodies lie on cold steel slabs, fluids drained into troughs below. Congealed blood, bile, the contents of the bladder, nothing remains concealed here. In the frigid air, breaths coalesce into vapors, tiny clouds that dissipate quickly, though few are released to trouble the air. On a table, a sequence of vertebrae helix into a tortuous spine, each bone boiled and gleaming, the marrow removed. Nearby, a brain rests on a scale, the crenulated folds crowned by a massive fibrous clot, cerebral fluid filling the scale's bowl like a glistening crystalline lake. He can lose himself for hours in the minutiae of anatomy, the burden of time temporarily alleviated as he focuses on flesh that is preserved from perishing. In her presence, he is painfully aware of years elapsing. No longer a young man, he cannot help but note his declining physique, the decrease in muscle tone, the whitening hair, the inverse proportion of time allotted to accomplishments sought. Lately, I can find no pose to please you. When you approach me on stage, it is with a look of distraction, detachment, the same gaze that greets me inside your study as you point to a spasm, to the curve of my back, but without reverence, without awe, the arc of every limb grown tiresome. Weeks pass without you asking for a single seizure, your voice impatient and strident, cutting through the edges of things. From below, your voice appears as a collection of angles, your beaked nose, your chiseled brow, sharp enough to inflict injury. You spend more time with corpses than you do with me, poring over anatomical charts and data in your study, coming out only to confirm a symptom or consider an incision point. In the amphitheater, you recite a corporal geography that I learned by heart, the thoracic inlet, the pelvic rim, the lozenges of Aphrodite. Behind you, diagrams of a body stripped of skin, the plush red muscles that clothe it from head to foot. You explain how to detach tendons, cut nerves, expose organs, marking dissection lines with the tip of your finger, elucidating the difficulty of cleanly separating skin from musculature, how the two seem to cleave together, threaded with fibers, veins, and fascia, the lattice work like the lace of a bridal veil. From the pulpit, you address your congregation, the crowd fixated, their faces rapt. You say, our relationship with the afflicted is a marriage of sorts, a union until death, born of the flesh, bound by the body. Or perhaps, to be more precise, it is a perpetual betrothal, secured by the tantalizing promise of eventual penetration. After all, the autopsy creates an intimacy that is closer to consummation than any comparable act. I stop listening, repeat the phrases marriage, union, betrothal, consummation inside my head, your words all that have sustained me for months now. I have learned more about my condition from what you've said to others than from a single sentence ever spoken to me directly. Sessions spent standing on the stage like a player in a parlor game, a prognosis scrawled on a sheet of paper and affixed to my person somewhere out of sight. A secret phrase that I must try to determine while you supply clues and code words to the audience, trying not to give the answer away. I've learned even less about you, scraps overheard in the hallways, morsels scavenged from your clenched jaws. I know that you live amidst a menagerie of animals, surrounding yourself with species that are dear to you. When you speak about the fragrant paws of dogs, the way in which a bird's feather, when pulled back on itself, is even softer underneath than it is above. When you speak of these things, you become radiant, Maître, your face growing unguarded. And I think that you must be human after all, capable of adoration. But the impulse is seldom aroused, despite my best intentions. One day I pass you in the courtyard, stooped over a sparrow that has collided with a window pane. You cup it in your palm, careful not to startle it too severely, its chest palpating like an eyelid in the midst of a fever dream. You croon and chirr to it under your breath, assuring me that it is only dazed, as if I too fear for its life. But Maître, I have other fears, seek other assurances. You pass the tiny twitching body to me, our hands touching during the transfer, the pulse of a heart momentarily clasped in our palms, and I am moved by this gesture of trust, your faith that I will not crush it. I would transform myself if I could, drape myself in fur or feathers, become bird or beast for you. I would ruffle my wings or raise my hackles so you could smooth them again. I would stun myself in order to make you stare into my eyes, to watch your ecstatic expression as my body stirred once again in response to the benevolence of your touch. I've endured this public courtship patiently, accepted for the most part its formalities and limitations, all at your insistence. But how can passion withstand such a prolonged engagement, with every interaction supervised and every expression of intimacy so profoundly restrained? At times I wonder if there is any part of you that wants a living wife. You show no hint of appetite, of arousal, as I sit before you, my hand between my legs, neck thrown back, the cold snap of metal, and your fingers even colder. It is as if I have lost you before I have even had you. Your patience used up, your interest. Then something shifts, and I note the darkening of your eyes when you witness beauty, when you cannot look away. Emotions expressed in increments so slight as to seem imagined seconds after they pass. All I ask is to be your paramour, your partner. I have opened myself up to you, Maître. I have welcomed you under my skin, and I'm not sure how much longer I will deign to wait. That is it.
Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Your prose is so poetic. Did you study poetry, or do you write poems as well as longer work?
When I was in high school, I started out with poetry, and when I was in college, I took my first writing course was a poetry course with the poet Kate Rushin, and I sort of found that I wanted to take the compression and the intensity of poetry and apply that to narrative and see sort of what would become of it. I really wasn't interested in writing the kind of fiction that, has lots of connecting scenes, and you're just writing something in order to make someone get from here to there. And that's something I loved about poetry, is you don't have to do that. So I do think there's definitely influence there, but I never felt that I was legit enough to be a poet, if that makes sense. From a fiction point of view, I felt like I didn't know enough.
Well, you grew up in the same town that Sylvia Plath
Mhm.
was from. And was that an influence? Is that
Yes.
something that you considered growing up? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I actually, I just did an event in my hometown, and when I was a senior, I got the Sylvia Plath Award, and she went to my same elementary school and everything. And when I read her work in college, and I saw the way that she would take a single word, and each word had multiple meanings, and would open up all these different levels of the poem to interpretation. I just thought, like, that's what I want to do. But I was also drawn towards fiction. So I really wanted to kind of do both. And I loved that I'm drawn towards people that really expose the sort of more painful, emotional side of things, but then find beauty and horror kind of commingling in the two. And she's definitely one of those people. She's a really incredible writer. So.
All right. So John's asking about connecting scenes. Like, how do you handle them? And do you use the literary equivalent of a jump cut to go from scene to scene?
I guess somewhat. It's definitely about juxtaposition. So when I write, I just write a whole bunch of fragments that have all the material that I want to, get into, and then I have to figure out some way to arrange it all. And my sister actually helps me with that a lot, putting it together. But I sort of love seeing the different ways different passages can connect. Sometimes they'll be connected by image or metaphor. And so in a way, it's a jump cut. It's definitely asking the reader to take a leap with me and sort of figure out how it's all put together and what kind of resonances are being created by the different fragments coming together. But I don't really think of that in advance. That comes later in the process for me.
So when you wrote Asylum, which is historical fiction, when did you discover Louise Augustine Glazy's and Shope? Like, when did that point happen? How many years did you know of their story? Did you research it? I kind of want to hear the background of your subject matter and how it came to you, which is the real question. I don't know where I was going there, but.
Yeah, so it dates all the way back to when I was an undergrad in college, and I took a women's history class, and we read this book called The Female Malady, which was about the history of female madness and the way it's represented in literature and art. And my dog is barking in the background, sorry. And so there are these incredible pictures and photographs that were taken by Charcot and at the asylum of Augustine and the other patients. And that I saw those photographs in Showalter's book and was sort of just struck by them. And then I looked into it further and found that the main source book was still in French and hadn't been translated. And I only took French in high school and like one semester in college. And this was an extremely complicated book that was written by like an art historian and theorist. And so I spent years translating it myself from my basic French and learning more about the history and all of that. So it dates back a really long time at this point, but I sort of worked on it on and off.
So with historical fiction, where do you draw the line between straight history and what you want to put in?
So again, I guess what I would say is like, I don't think of myself as a historical fiction writer. I think of myself as like an experimental writer who wrote a historically based book. And so one of the things I love to play with is when there actually is fact that is so incredible, it seems like it came from your imagination. And there was a lot of that in the history here, like some of the methodologies that were used. The fact that Augustine goes through a period where she can only see in black and white, that really happened. So there are all these incredible moments in the history, and I wanted to definitely include as many of those as possible and sort of keep my invention to, you know, the dreams that are in the novel, the hard to categorize lover that she has, but even that was true. She had this lover M that she would invoke and talk about. So, I mean, I definitely think it's really interesting to include as many facts as possible, but I was also more interested in looking back at the roots of all of this, like the way it connected to mythology, the way it connected to the beginnings of medicine, and then how that influenced Charcot and Augustine, and then how that still kind of is influencing our institutions today in ways that we don't even see a lot of the time. So
there's a lot of conflict in that book. Did you find yourself pulling for based on history, pulling for one of the characters? And did you have to adjust that in your writing to give it a more straightforward approach?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am all on Augustine's side. Charcot, it was really hard for me to access Charcot in a way that wasn't just like straight villainy, because he does so many things that are just beyond the pale. But at the same time, I mean, he was attempting to solve a mystery that in a way that other people hadn't. Like, he was trying to give some acknowledgement of the fact that hysteria wasn't linked to the womb intrinsically. He had things about him that he was trying to get across, even if I don't think he succeeded. And he also, I was able to really relate to the sort of desperation of him trying to get this masterwork finished, because this book, not saying it's a masterwork, but it took like, you know, almost 20 years to finish. And as things kind of went on, I was able to like have more sympathy and empathy for his desire to get this accomplished and not knowing, you know, how it's going to land in the world. But I definitely 100% support Augustine other than that. And, you know, not a lot is known as what happened to her in the world. So it's anyone's bet as to how she managed.
Now, on the flip side, when you're doing your research on this, did you have to kind of cut off what has happened in neurology after, like, current neurology and current views on bipolar individuals versus how it was viewed in the 19th century? Yeah,
I mean, it's complicated because I do think that there are all these ways in which the really antiquated thinking is still with us, even if it's just in the language that we use about mental illness or medicine. But at the same time, there's no way for me to know what was really going on with the hysterics. You know, I have trouble believing that it was all created and that was all show. But at the same time, you know, I have no way of knowing that what part was factual and what wasn't. So I really wanted to not come down on either side of that, because I think it's probably a mixture of the two. And even though, you know, I do bring a modern sensibility to some extent, I wasn't interested in exploring like why hysteria was what it was in terms of the medical side of things. I was much more interested in kind of the metaphors and the power dynamics that came out of the way people dealt with it at the time, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I could talk forever about hysteria and also the use of that word loosely, how to describe people. But
Yes.
I really want to talk about like writing about such strong enemies. And when you're writing about enemies, did you ever draw of your own experiences? I mean, did you have to find like look at your inner dislike of somebody or inner competition with somebody? Did you go there mentally in order to write the conflict in your book?
I don't think so. I think that kind of almost what was more interesting to me was the way that the two of them were actually really similar to one another and had these connections that could have been something amazing in a certain way and then just went off the rails. So like, for example, they both had the souls of artists. They both wanted to create something and live this life that was more extraordinary than a normal life. They both had these moments where they could access this shared creative space together, but then the power dynamic is just so skewed, and Charcot can never allow himself to let Augustine share in the creation and have any kind of public role in unraveling hysteria. And so he just constantly is cutting down and basically destroying whatever connection that they could have together. And then the enmity at the end obviously gets really intense, but I don't think I drew from anything personal that I can remember on that level. I think I just sort of put myself in that mindset and thought about what would happen if this was like your sole point of contact in the world almost at the time, and this is what was happening to you.
In your book, is Augustine more heroic than what she was in real life?
That's hard to know too, because there's such limited information. She definitely was very interested, like there are actual quotations from her within the book. At the very end of the book is something she said. So she had pronouncements that definitely seemed to be pushing things and questioning what was going on. And she also, did have a flirty side. She had a rebellious side. She broke out of the asylum multiple times. The ending of the book, which I won't give away, but that's true to actual history. So I have this feeling that, there's a certain truth to it, but of course I can't know that 100%. And with fiction, you are creating a narrative arc and trying to get the conflict resolved and that sort of thing. But I have the feeling she was feisty and heroic in a lot of ways.
I got a question in the chat. Were you ever interested in The Yellow Wallpaper by Gilman and the bio behind it?
Yeah, I definitely learned about that. Again, in my women's history class where we did a lot on the history of madness, we read Yellow Wallpaper, and I definitely love her approach of, looking at the arabesques in the wallpaper and what's behind them and how that links to the madness. I mean, I would say that technique is something that kind of fascinates me. Anything that's kind of layered and symbolic for the reader is something I really want to lean into. And I did, there was a point when I was going to write about Augustine, Dora, and I'm forgetting who the third person was, but I was going to include
Anna O.
Might have been. Yeah, I was going to include other major figures in the project, but then I didn't. But they definitely all, there's so much fascinating history from that time that all of them kind of pull at you to explore more.
Your book Hangings is a book with 3 novellas included in it. What was the writing process and how was it different in writing a novella versus writing a book like Asylum?
So I'd say it was much harder to write Asylum, to write a novel, partly because I feel like I don't have formal knowledge as to how to construct a novel, and I was sort of blindly figuring it out. Because in a novella, everything is so compressed and you can kind of just go all out. You don't have to pace them in the same way and have kind of the lulls and then the moments that are going to push the reader forward over such an expansive array of text, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So the compression of novellas is really freeing because you can just go wild and the whole time be like 100%. But with the book, I had a lot of trouble creating like the middle section. That it would frequently drag and bog down for people who were reading it, and figuring out how to cut so that the novel was tight, but that I could still get in as much as I wanted to was really hard. And I actually had a teacher who once said, like, I'm sure this is going to end up being a novella. There's no way it's going to be a novel. And that like haunted me. And I was like, no, I'm going to make it a novel. But it took years. I mean, it was really difficult.
So facts in this case got in the way of the narrative flow of the book?
Somewhat. I would say like there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to include that I couldn't include. There were so many different methodologies that Charcot used, and all of them were so fascinating to kind of explore. And I really had to like streamline, because otherwise what happened is that the plot started becoming repetitive. And although I wanted to get across the fact that there was repetition in what was happening, I also had to limit that so that people would keep reading. So it wasn't really like I had to change fact or anything. It was more that I had to like leave stuff out that still interested me, but didn't really fit with the arc.
Now, in terms of compressed writing, I know Joseph asked earlier in the chat, do you ever write flash fiction? Have you written flash fiction?
I have actually, after I finished Asylum, I felt like I hadn't written in a really long time besides that project. And I had all this self-doubt about, could I still write, or was that it? And so I sort of first started writing some flash fiction pieces after that I'm still working on. They're kind of like loosely connected. So they're not exactly flash fiction either, because I have this conceit of like an overall theme that's connecting them. And if I didn't, I would probably cut certain things out if it was just a flash fiction piece and have it be really just bare bones. So they're also sort of hybrid. I never make anything particularly simple for myself, unfortunately. So.
All right, I'm going to close out with a final question, and that would be just purely from the writing and production perspective. What are the pros and the cons of being married to another writer?
Oh my, that's intense. There are a lot of pros in the sense that you understand where each other is at to a certain degree. Like my husband's finishing a book now that's getting into the publicity part of things, and I just know how intense and vulnerable making that phase is. And so there's a lot of ways in which we can connect on that. He also can help me edit, and I help him edit. But there is a certain amount to which you worry about, I don't know, like not exactly competing, but I don't know, everyone feeling like they're being equally acknowledged in the world and for what they want and what they do. And we write very differently. So if that answers it judiciously.
It does, but there's certainly a lot to be said about the shared joy of your spouse's success. I think we had spoken earlier today about like, yeah, it's much easier when you know someone and care about them to definitely feel good about their accomplishments. Yeah, this is a very strange sounding question. It's trying to skate around it without sounding like a douche, but it was. But anyway, what a wonderful, wonderful reading, and I really love talking to you. It's so great speaking to people that are so smart. I love smart people.
Thank you so much. I get so nervous doing these sorts of things, so I really appreciate it.
Oh, you kicked here, and here's the book once again. So please, I've intentionally brought it up on bookshop.org, which benefits a lot of your indie bookstores. If you need a fast online fix, go there. Otherwise, go to your indie bookstore and do what you need to do. So again, Nina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we are going to now cut off the live stream and if people, the link to get in here for the open mic, if you're just watching it on Facebook, you can get in and be on the open mic if you'd like. I'll certainly will let you in. And but if not, I'll see you in Thursdays after